Hello, welcome to my book, Part 3. The last part ended kind of abruptly because I was checking the time and I went ahead and clicked on the wrong thing to bring down the camera. But it was at 25 minutes or 22 minutes, which is good enough. Again, I'm trying to target 30 minutes for each part. Once again, you can get a free copy of the book through Ananke1 at yahoo.com. My name is Lance Gordon. And just put regarding free copy and I'll be able to shoot you a PDF of the whole book instead of you waiting for me talking about it. Also, please push the subscribe button so that when another part is uploaded and ready to be seen, I believe you get notified. So please do that. Okay, so we're going to continue where we were. Let me get the book pulled up. Okay, we are up to Christianity in chapter 1. If I can do it. I think I screwed it up again. Let me see now. 1 second. I'll get there. I think I always do this, don't I? And we have Judaism, and we have, should put down a page number, shouldn't I? So we're up to page 9, which would be good. All right, so this is part 3, once again, of the book, The Philosophy of the Ananke. You can get a free copy if you want to email me, or you can wait for me to read it in for you. So let's continue. Christianity in our review of the 11 major religions, in a very brief manner. Approximately 2,000 years ago, a child was born amidst a Jewish population that apparently was slowly corrupting itself and wandering away from the 5 books of Moses. This corruption may have taken place as a consequence of the Roman takeover of the Promised Land in 63 BC. It probably was the case that Roman authority was an unwelcome event after 100 years of predominantly Jewish self-rule. And so Jesus was born and created a new belief so that the remaining pious Jews would be able to return to the virtues as written in the books of Moses. Later, by the work of Paul, Gentiles were given the opportunity to join this appealing way of thought, a system of thought that preached the existence of one supremely loving, forgiving, and moral God, quote, our Father. This God was the creator and preserver of all things. It was further believed that Jesus was the Messiah, the Son of God. God spoke with him, through him, by divine inspiration. Moreover, the teachings of Jesus reflected the way to salvation, since he was the Son of the supreme God of all men. It was felt that man was born a sinner and in need of redemption, and by following the way of Jesus and preaching the gospel, he could obtain salvation. It was understood that by being a good Christian and following the way, one could create God's kingdom here on earth, or at least guarantee a rewarding and joyous afterlife, an afterlife where the immortal soul was accountable to God, and in the final judgment would go either to heaven or hell. Lastly, the souls that were neither deserving of heaven nor so bad as to go to hell were believed to be sent to purgatory. This was a state of spiritual existence where one paid for his sins. When cleansed, the purified soul ascended to heaven, heaven being directly obtainable for those who followed Jesus and who repented for their sins here on earth. Okay, we're up to Hinduism. And once again, we're being very brief with all these religions. And if you want more detail, you should get other books to fill in all the gaps that you may be curious about. But for right now, it's almost a Reader's Digest summary of these religions. Nothing more than that, just to give us a flavor and to give us a bedrock that we can build the Ananke concept off of. So we're up to Hinduism. Similar in age to Judaism, the Hindu philosophy can be considered to originate with the Aryans, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, Aryans, 3,500 years ago. Like the ancient Jews and the Semitic tribes, we can also date an ancient civilization around the Indus River, which had beliefs similar to the Aryan Hindus, but were nearly 1,500 years earlier. However, for the sake of comparison, we must consider the start to be with the Aryans, who passed down the Vedas and the Brahman scriptures. In the beginning there was one spirit, Brahman, that had three general behaviors or properties. The first being that Brahman was Brahma, the creator of all things. The second being that Brahman was Vishnu, the preserver of all things. And lastly, that Brahman was Shiva, the destroyer of all things. These three behaviors were accomplished sequentially in a day of Brahman, of which we are currently in the Vishnu phase. The Shiva phase was considered remotely in the future, and the Brahma phase was remotely in the past. Lastly, the day of Brahman was considered 8.6 billion years long, according to the Bhagavad Gita. Whatever. Actually, if you look at it, it's page 12, 8.17. Interesting, 8.6 billion years that they said, at least the translation was that, as opposed to 6,000. An interesting culture. It was believed that man must submit to fate, as in the law of karma, where good comes from good and evil must come from evil, that each individual must find and follow dharma, the moral order, that by following dharma, man could reach nirvana, a blissful state of happiness. It was interpreted by the Hindu priests that this order would include a caste system, social structure, as implied in their holy scriptures. To find dharma, one must learn the way of Brahma through a high priest, guru, or teacher. The method of learning the patterns of Brahman were by a system of question and one answer, this answer being a prescribed answer, not subject really to debate. The student merely memorized the answers by rote and any logic if applicable. All answers were never revised, altered, or changed. In the author's opinion, my opinion, major objections in their scriptures, the Vedas and the Brahmanas, by a high priest usually resulted in the creation of a new religion, such as Buddhism, Jainism, or Sikhism. On afterlife, they believed in the reincarnation cycle that continued until the soul had learned the way of Brahman as it applied to man. If the soul had learned dharma, moral law, and achieved the appropriate behavior here on earth, then the wheel of births and rebirths would stop, and you would experience nirvana. It should be noted that this reincarnation cycle rewarded or punished based on the deeds of the previous life, but passed on no memory, only inclination. Thus, upon death, your karma was determined and you would be reborn into an appropriate position. The reward and punishment continued in this manner until you complied by your own free will to the way of Brahman by finding dharma, its moral order, as it was reflected in human affairs. A very brief synopsis comes on Taoism, far smaller than I probably would do at this point in time. Taoism. About 2,600 years ago, a man called Lao Tse walked the earth contemporaneously to Confucius. Within the Chinese mind was a concern with the reflection of a universal order here on earth. Rarely was a supreme god mentioned except in a Confucian scripture, which referenced Shang-Ti as the supreme ruler, which only the emperor was allowed to worship. The main concern was proper, just government, directed toward the goal of justice and harmony for all the people. Also, within the Confucian scriptures, there was a belief in Tian, the supreme moral order, that should be reflected here on earth. Within these Chinese thoughts arose Taoism, which was founded by Lao Tse. No god was mentioned directly, but the Tao, the quote-unquote way, was referred to as the relationship of the universe to man. It was believed that we must all search for and follow the divine way, the Tao, of the universe, in order to create a happy society, in which the highest ideals of the Tao were realized. Although no systematic Tao was evidenced in their holy scripture, the Tao Te King, numerous rules or principles were recorded as an attempt to reflect the proper way of being. Essentially, the book attempted to describe the activities and attributes of the Tao. It suggested that the Tian Tao, heaven's moral way, was quietly, unselfishly, effective for good, and that we should reflect this calm, quiet, yet effective attitude. That man should discover and follow the principles of the Tao by striving for the ethical ideal of the Tao, which was a quiet, restful simplicity like heaven itself. On to the last discussion, namely the emergence of the Ananke. The concept of the Ananke. About 3,000 years ago, the writings of Homer were being formulated. In the Homeric epics of the Iliad and the Odyssey, a new concept was emerging. In the affairs of the Achaean Greeks, such as Achilles and Agamemnon, during the Trojan War, it was acknowledged that causation ruled the outcomes, not chance. This causation emanating from a shadowy power in the cosmos, from a universal order which was above the demigods, half human, half God. This universal order, this necessity as we translate it, which is abusing the term, this fate, not quite a fate, but that's how we interpret Ananke, this law was called Ananke. It was believed that this Ananke was above the demigods and man, but accessible to all. Sophocles, the playwright, stated that, quote, in the most complex and apparently fortuitous combination of events, there is a design, though what it means we may not know. It was because the gods could see the whole design, that they had the powers and could foretell the inevitable outcome of certain events. It was further believed that this Ananke was a regular rhythm in the universe, which the gods and man could strain but could never break. That consequently the gods and man were free within certain prescribed boundaries, free to choose the way of Ananke or to go against it. Ananke was perceived as rational, logical, moral, and simple in that particular events and particular patterns were mere subsets of a more universal, global pattern of a higher level. It cannot be overemphasized that the Greeks believed strongly in the moral behavior of this Ananke as it applied to human affairs. He felt that a sympathetic relationship existed between human conduct and the behavior of nature. If a man goes with this Ananke and follows its way, then its orderly processes will go forward to reward this behavior with the fruits of the earth. Above all, the boldest philosophic hypothesis of the ancient Greeks, never before expressed in mankind, was that Ananke could and should be deciphered by all men. That by understanding Ananke with respect to human affairs and particle behavior, we can elevate ourselves to the status of the demigods and consequently produce a better quality life. It's really earth-shattering if you think about it. Earth-shaking, earth-shattering. Early evidence of Ananke-like concepts, in brief. In our previous discussion, the reader should note that the Egyptian Memphite theology 4,400 years ago acknowledges one supreme god, Pita, who created a moral, justice-seeking order in the universe, and that all things must conform to this order. The Hindu philosophy 3,500 years ago acknowledges one god, Brahman, and his order, Karma. They believe that man must find and follow Dharma, the moral order, as it expressed itself in human affairs. Lastly, the philosophy of the Tao, 2,600 years ago, in a remote part of the world, acknowledges that we must search for and follow the divine way, the Tao of the universe, in order to create a happy society in which the highest ideals of the Tao are realized. Told you that would be brief. Early Greek thought on Ananke, 500 BC. Evidence suggests that the Greek language has similarities to Sanskrit, the language of the Occident, India. Moreover, the Pythagorean believed in the transmigration, reincarnation of souls, and a hope of liberation from the wheel of births connected to their doctrine. One may conclude from this evidence that the Greek people were at least exposed to Hindu-like concepts. On the other hand, Greek trade was greatly involved with Egypt. Moreover, as is stated, and I give a quote as to where it was stated, the Greek culture is the offspring of two profoundly different ones. The Olympian cults, where Ananke was above Zeus and the other demigods who protected the state or the family, and cults based on the mysterious life-giving powers of nature, which taught doctrines of rebirth, regeneration, and immortality. The first cult, combined with the evidence of trade with Egypt, clearly suggests the influence of the Egyptian Memphitic theology. Thus, we can reasonably conclude that a moral order of things was not uniquely Greek. What was unique was their interpretation that this order was a set of patterns, culminating in one universal pattern in its most simple form. The Greeks felt that these patterns should be deciphered by man so that we can go with the flow of this Ananke, thereby improving our lives. And so it was. The early Greek philosophers set out to discover Ananke. If it could be done, then man could achieve the status of demigods, with the consequent ability to improve his way of life. So we see in history Thales examining the essence of all physical things. His conclusion by observation of the commonality in all elements was water. Anaximenes, I think that's how you pronounce it, investigated the patterns of things and concluded that Thales was wrong, and that this elemental soul substance must be air or mist. Anaximander, Thales' successor, concluded that this essence of physical nature must be an indefinable universal something, so small that all things were composed of it. The Ionian Anaximander further concluded that since the universe was always composed of opposing forces, that this undefined something must contain oppositions within itself. Excuse me. It was through these oppositions, and under the influence of eternal motion, that the objects of sense were formed. These objects then returned to this elemental universal essence when they decayed. The formation and consequent decay being necessary to conform to another universal pattern that the Greeks recognized called dike, the moralistic balance of all things in nature. Democritus further improved upon this theory by expressing the fact that the micro-pattern of Anaximander must hover in empty space along with millions of other micro-patterns in order to form things. He called this micro-pattern the atom. The reader should note that this description of the micro-world, although not exactly proper, is unbelievably accurate considering they had no instrumentation or computers. Moreover, this thought was derived by virtue of the postulates concerning Ananke, one pattern, decipherable, universal, etc. The more the Greeks searched for the patterns of this Ananke, the more his instincts proved correct. Underneath the apparent chaos, there was simplicity. It was law that ruled the universe, not chance and not the whim of the gods. The universe was based on logos, reason, sometimes translated as logical moralistic design, logical moralistic thought. And by using logos, we could uncover its apparent mysteries. And so the story continued. Man could now control the quality of his life by understanding the patterns of Ananke and going with it. Events recorded in time became important since there was a chance of revealing the underlying pattern of human history if we only knew the facts. Thus Herodotus, the first historian, attempted to organize the historical data so that succeeding generations would be able to uncover the Ananke in history, thereby using the pattern to improve and direct their lives. Certainly one would never go against a historic pattern that led to the destruction of a civilization if he were made aware of it. After all, doesn't, quote, history have an uncanny way of repeating itself? The Greeks now were concerned with human affairs as mere extensions of this Ananke. Greek tragedies were built on the faith that in human affairs it was law that reigned, not chance. Thus, the discipline of psychology began to emerge from these ancient wise people. By 500 BC, the influence of the Ananke was strong and impacting Greek thought in all dimensions. Their lives were improving, and they were obtaining some of the powers of the demigods. The problem was that the advances were too slow. Thought under Ananke was still too mystic and lacking the logos that was necessary. A systematic way to uncover the patterns was needed. And so Socrates became a dominant influence in the Greek mind. He developed a logical process of question and answer, whereby every hypothetical speculation regarding the nature of a thing was tested until the postulates of the concept were uncovered. These postulates were fundamental subconcepts which every reasonable man, through their experiences, observations, and knowledge, would agree upon as obvious. Thereafter, the truth would be built up through logos, through logical moralistic thought, keeping in mind the Ananke. Stage by stage, the truth would grow, allowing no additional hypotheses to be incorporated without severe scrutiny that the whole picture was not violated, and that the additional information really did fit into the scheme of things, this Ananke. Superimposed on Socratic logic was another approach recommended by Hippocrates, the father of modern medicine. In a passage from the Precepts, it is stated, "In medicine, one must pay attention not only to plausible theorizing, logismos, but to experience and reason, logos, together. I agree that theorizing is to be approved, provided that it is based on facts, and systematically makes its deductions from what is observed." And so we come to our present scientific methodology, which a Greek would more likely state as follows. To arrive at the patterns within Ananke, as they apply to a situation, whether it be physics, chemistry, psychology, or the ultimate nature of the universe, one must first, through logos, logical moralistic thought, arrive at a theory. This theory should be broken down into its fundamental hypotheses, which can be tested by factual, independent events that relate to the hypothesis under investigation. The postulates of the theory should be recorded as those concepts that reasonable men would agree upon based on their observations, personal experiences, and knowledge. From these postulates and hypotheses, the theory should be verified, hypothesis by hypothesis, allowing no postulate to stand without factual support, and no hypothesis to be condoned without rigorous factual testing. In this manner, the original theory, derived by a process called logismos, could be supported or logically modified in order to approach the eternal truth of the situation under investigation. This theory necessarily must explain the observable world data to the problem under study. It logically must fit into the universal order Ananke, which has as one of its hypotheses that everything is a mere extension, a mere substitution into the more global, universal, quote-unquote, formula, which was assumed to exist and greatly sought after. Thus, all theories must fit together, and contradictions necessarily point to the untruths of the supposedly valid thought. Next part. Evidence of Ananke in the New Testament. According to the preface of to the Bible, I quote which Bible I used, quote, "The books of the Bible were written either in Hebrew, Aramaic, or Greek." Greek is our original language of all the books of the New Testament, 27 out of 72, except Matthew, which was originally written in Aramaic. Thus we can conclude that the Gospel according to St. John was originally written in Greek. And to continue, quote, "None of the original manuscripts written by the hands of the inspired writers have come down to us. However, there are some very ancient copies of the originals." The commenter goes on to say that the three most important copies from which the English translation is derived is as follows. 1. The Mount Sinai manuscript, 4th century AD, being a Greek translation of the Old Testament and a copy of the original Greek text of the New Testament. This manuscript was discovered in 1859 in the monastery of St. Catherine on Mount Sinai. 2. The Vatican manuscript, 4th century AD, containing a copy of the complete Bible in Greek. 3. The Alexandrian manuscript written in the 5th century AD in Egypt. This contains a copy of the Holy Bible in Greek as well. He continues, quote, "Modern copies of the Hebrew or Greek texts of the Scriptures are without error," notice this one, "only insofar as they are the same as the original. Copyists could have made mistakes. Translations of the Bible are absolutely without error, only insofar as they accurately express the ideas as written by the inspired writers in the original language." The author, me, now wishes to state that this evidence suggests that not only was the Gospel according to St. John written in Greek, but some error could have been introduced into our English editions, coming from the fact that it was translated from a copy of the original. At this point, allow me to quote directly from the Bible itself. According to the Gospel of Jesus Christ, according to St. John, quote, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God, and the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us," referring to Jesus. Forgive me if I diverge one last time before making my ultimate point. As we have stated time and time again, Ananke is the moralistic order which can be deciphered by any intelligent man or woman, if only he or she uses logos, which can accurately be defined as logical moralistic thought. Logical in the sense that Ananke is a design that unifies and links all. Moralistic in the sense that this design has purpose, which seems to have moralistic properties as it expresses itself in human affairs. Thought in the sense that one must investigate Ananke through his own inner thoughts and inspirations. Thus, Ananke reveals itself through logos, logical, moralistic thought. As H.D.F. Quito states on page 187 of his book, The Greeks, logos is usually mistranslated as word. Think about that. It was a mistranslation. Therefore, from my preceding arguments, we can justifiably retranslate the above famous biblical passage as follows. In the beginning was the logical moralistic thought, and the logical moralistic thought was with God, and the logical moralistic thought was God. He was in the beginning with God, and the logical moralistic thought was made flesh and dwelt among us. My point should now become clear. At least St. John was keenly aware of Ananke and felt that Jesus was the individual who could interpret this Ananke as it applied to all mankind. Thus, Jesus' teachings could be considered a fantastic attempt at decoding the universal relationship Ananke, what we might say is the order of God. In the remaining chapters, it will be my purpose to attempt to teach you, the reader, logismos, the way to decode and theorize about the Ananke. I will also share with you my interpretation of the Ananke that I derived from more than 15 years of painstaking thought. In addition, because that was 1985, it is now 2017, I've had many updates that I will be sharing with you in the appendix that expands upon the initial 6 chapters. Towards this end, I attempt to uncover the cosmogony, using logos wherever possible. I try to relate Ananke to us in our daily lives while keeping the concept as simple as possible. At the end of this book, I hope that you will remember the 4 major patterns of this Ananke and how to apply this, in a way of speaking, formula to your daily life. May peace be with you, and may you live with the order, thereby approaching happiness and everlasting joy. Okay. We'll be up to chapter 2 in the next part, which is the logos of the Ananke and the logos of pursuing the truth, next time in part 4. For right now, part 3, I must bid you adieu, and if you want to read the book again, it's ananke1@yahoo.com, Lance Gordon, regarding free copy. So that's about it. Let me see where I am. I'm at 28 minutes, which is perfect, and therefore I'll see you soon in part 1, 2, 3, 4, I guess. Bye-bye.